The morning sunlight filtered weakly through the half-drawn curtains, casting long shadows across the living room. Sarah stood in the doorway of the kitchen, one hand pressed against her swollen belly, the other clutching a mug of lukewarm coffee that she had no interest in drinking. She stared at the man sitting at the kitchen table, his eyes fixed on his phone, as if she were invisible. John. Her husband. The man she had once loved with all her heart, the man who had promised to support her through everything, who now sat in silence, absorbed in a digital world that seemed to hold more of his attention than the life they had built together. Sarah swallowed hard, trying to push away the lump that had formed in her throat. There were times, like now, when she felt the distance between them more than ever. She had long since given up on expecting things to change. The frustration had crept into their relationship slowly, like a storm on the horizon, unnoticed at first, but now, impossible to ignore. For months, John had grown more distant, more critical. His words, sharp and biting, cut deeper with each passing day. Sarah took a deep breath and set the mug down on the counter. She was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of trying to prove herself, tired of being constantly belittled. She had thought that once she became pregnant with their second child, things might improve. After all, their first child, Jake, had been the light of their lives. But the pressure of the new baby, the constant criticism, and John's long hours at work had only worsened the strain. She closed her eyes for a moment, willing herself to stay calm. She didn't want to argue. She didn't want to raise her voice. But John had a way of pushing her buttons, of making her feel small, insignificant. She couldn't remember the last time they had truly connected. Their conversations had become transactional. Pick up the groceries, did you pay the bills? It was all about the logistics of life, the mundane details, without any space for love, warmth, or care. And then, this morning. Sarah, I can't believe you still haven't done this, John's voice sliced through her thoughts. She looked up to see him glaring at her, his phone now discarded on the table, his brow furrowed in frustration. You've been sitting here all morning, and this place looks like a disaster. What the hell do you do all day? Are you just too busy growing that belly to manage the house? Her heart sank. She had been expecting this, but that didn't make it any easier. She felt the sting of his words deep inside. I'm doing my best, John, she replied, her voice shaking, though she tried to hold it together. It's not easy. Not easy, he interrupted, his voice rising. You're pregnant, and that's your excuse. I'm out there working 12-hour days, and all I ask is that you take care of the basics at home. Is that too much to ask? Do you even realize how lucky you are to be able to stay at home all day? Sarah felt her hands tremble as she pressed them together, fighting the urge to lash out. He didn't understand. He didn't see how hard it was for her to balance the weight of pregnancy, the responsibility of caring for their son, and the constant pressure to be perfect in every way. She had tried to talk to him about her struggles, but he never listened. His world was about his work, his success, his image. Everything else came second. I'm doing everything I can, she said, trying to keep the tears at bay. It's not as easy as you think. John stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. His face was red, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. You know what? I'm done with this, he snapped. I work my ass off, and you sit at home acting like it's all too much for you. I don't need this. I don't need you holding me back. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She had heard the frustration in his voice before, but this was different. This wasn't just disappointment. This was anger. Cold, biting anger. Maybe I should just stop working altogether, he continued, his voice dripping with disdain. Maybe you'll finally appreciate me when I'm the one who's struggling. He turned away, muttering under his breath as he grabbed his jacket. I'm leaving, he said, his back to her. Don't bother trying to fix things. It's already too late. The door slammed behind him, and Sarah stood there, motionless. The room felt suffocating. The silence was deafening. She hadn't been prepared for this. She had hoped things might settle down, but this was something else. She had never seen him so angry, so disconnected. Her thoughts spun in a haze as she sank into the nearest chair. Her mind raced through the past few months, searching for signs of what had led them to this point. She couldn't put her finger on it. Was it the stress of the pregnancy? The mounting pressure from his job? Or was it something more, something she had failed to see? She didn't know, but she was scared. Scared of what John had become. Scared of what might happen next. The day passed in a blur. Sarah tried to focus on the household tasks, laundry, dishes, taking care of Jake, but her mind kept drifting back to that moment. The argument. John's harsh words. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Something fundamental. By the time evening rolled around, Sarah was sitting on the couch, her hands resting on her belly, staring blankly at the TV. The house was eerily quiet. No sound of John's footsteps, no late-night chatter. It was as if he had completely disappeared from their lives. And then, around 10 p.m., the door opened with a soft creak. Sarah looked up, her heart skipping a beat. It was John, but he didn't look like the man who had left in a fit of rage that morning. His face was pale, his eyes wide, as though he had just seen a ghost. "John?" she asked, her voice tentative. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he dropped his jacket on the floor and collapsed into the chair across from her. His breath was shallow, as though he couldn't catch it. I've been fired," he said, his voice low, almost in disbelief. Sarah blinked, the words not registering at first. "What do you mean, fired?" He exhaled sharply and ran his hand through his hair. "I mean exactly what I said. I lost my job today." Just like that. He snapped his fingers. "I don't even know why. They said I was too distracted, too much on my mind." Can you believe that? Sarah felt a rush of emotions flood her body. Part of her wanted to shout at him, to remind him of the cruelty he had shown her that morning. But another part of her, something deeper, felt an odd sense of relief. The man who had belittled her for months, who had mocked her every step of the way, was now facing the consequences of his own actions. It was almost poetic. But there was no satisfaction in it. There was no victory. There was only fear. Fear of what came next. "John. I'm sorry," she said softly, despite everything inside her telling her not to be. "But, what are we going to do now?" His eyes flickered, the reality of the situation settling in. "I don't know," he muttered. "I really don't know." As the night wore on, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The tension in their lives was reaching a boiling point, and whatever came next, it was bound to change everything. For better or for worse, Sarah wasn't sure. But she knew one thing: they were no longer the same people they had been that morning. And as she lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, one thought kept running through her mind. This was only the beginning of something much bigger. Something she could never have expected. Sarah lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts she couldn't quite control. John's words, the way he had collapsed in that chair, eyes wide and filled with disbelief, his admission of being fired, kept replaying in her head, over and over again. It felt surreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. She had expected a lot of things from that day, but never this. The man who had belittled her, mocked her struggles, and dismissed her worth was now reeling from his own downfall. The irony wasn't lost on her, but it didn't bring any peace. There was no satisfaction in seeing him suffering, instead, it stirred a deep uncertainty in her gut. What did this mean for them? For their future? She turned to look at him, still lying beside her, his back turned toward her. He was asleep, or pretending to be asleep. His breathing was shallow, as if the weight of the day had drained all the energy from his body. But there was no comfort in the silence between them. The chasm between them felt wider now, more distant than it had ever been. She could feel the anxiety creeping up, squeezing her chest. The financial strain of the job loss was one thing, but the emotional toll, it was more than she could bear. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the silence. She reached for it, praying it was a message from her sister, or a distraction of some kind, but it was just a notification from the local news. She glanced at the headline, "Rising unemployment hits local economy hard, companies begin cutting staff." Her heart sank further. Was this just the beginning of a bigger crisis? Would John be able to find another job? And if not, what would they do? How could she keep their family afloat? She set the phone back down, feeling a pang of helplessness. There were no answers, only questions, and none of them were comforting. The next morning, the house was unusually quiet. John had left early, though Sarah didn't know where he had gone. He hadn't said a word to her when he got up, and it felt strange. Usually, even in the midst of their arguments, they exchanged some form of parting words. But not today. Sarah made breakfast for Jake, their 4-year-old son, as the weight of the situation continued to press down on her. The kitchen felt colder than usual, the air thick with tension. She tried to focus on the mundane tasks of motherhood, cutting up fruit, pouring cereal, and getting Jake dressed, but her mind kept wandering to John and what he might be doing. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. She kept glancing at it, waiting for John to return, but time seemed to stretch on endlessly. Every minute felt like an hour. When the door finally opened, she wasn't sure what to expect. John walked in, looking disheveled, his face drawn and tired. He had changed out of his suit, but his demeanor was far from the man she was used to. There was no confidence in his stride, no swagger in the way he carried himself. He looked smaller, defeated. "Where were you?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though she could feel the edge creeping into her words. John paused for a moment, as if considering whether to tell her the truth. Finally, he exhaled and dropped his keys on the counter. "I went to the unemployment office," he muttered. "It's a mess, Sarah. The lines are long, the process is complicated. And there's no guarantee that I'll even qualify for anything." Sarah's heart dropped. "So, what now?" she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "What are we supposed to do if you can't find another job?" John ran a hand through his hair and sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "I don't know," he said, his voice cracking. "I really don't know." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. The man who had always been so certain, so sure of himself, was now crumbling before her. It was like watching someone she didn't recognize, someone unfamiliar and vulnerable. She had never seen John like this, and part of her wondered if he was as terrified as she was. "We'll figure it out," she said, though the words felt empty. "We always do." But deep down, she knew the truth. This time, it was different. The stakes were higher. There was no easy fix, no quick solution. This was a problem that would take more than just figuring it out. As the days passed, the tension between them grew thicker. John became more withdrawn, retreating into himself, spending hours on his computer, sending out resumes, and making phone calls that led nowhere. The house remained in a state of perpetual disarray. Sarah tried to keep things together for Jake's sake, but even she could feel the strain. It wasn't just the financial uncertainty that was weighing on her, it was the emotional distance between her and John. They no longer communicated like they used to. Every conversation felt strained, forced. There was an unspoken resentment in the air, and it seemed to linger no matter how hard they tried to push it away. One afternoon, a week after John's firing, Sarah sat on the couch, folding laundry while Jake played with his toys in the living room. The familiar hum of the washing machine was oddly comforting. It was the only sound that broke the stillness. John came into the room, looking more exhausted than ever. His eyes were bloodshot, his shoulders slumped. He dropped onto the chair opposite Sarah, his face drawn with frustration. "I can't get a single call back," he said, his voice low. "I've sent out 50 resumes, but no one is interested. Everyone's cutting back, and no one's hiring." Sarah glanced up at him, trying to mask the worry that clouded her expression. "Have you tried any other avenues? Maybe temp work, or something part-time?" John's lips curled into a bitter smile. "You think I'm going to take some temp job? You think I'm going to lower myself to that level? I've worked hard for years, Sarah. I've built my career. I'm not going to start from the bottom again." Sarah felt a pang in her chest. She knew how proud he was, how much he defined himself by his success and his job. But she also knew that pride could only carry them so far. Pride wouldn't pay the bills. Pride wouldn't put food on the table. "I understand," she said, though it was becoming harder to pretend. "But we need to face reality. If we don't figure something out soon, we won't have a choice." John looked at her, his face hardening. "I'm trying, Sarah. But you don't get it. You don't understand what this is like." The words stung more than they should have. Sarah closed her eyes, fighting the tears that threatened to spill. "I do understand," she whispered. "I do." Days turned into weeks, and still, John's job search led nowhere. The bills piled up, each one more urgent than the last. Sarah had taken on more work, babysitting, cleaning houses, whatever she could do to bring in extra cash, but it was never enough. They were drowning. And with each passing day, Sarah felt herself sinking deeper into a pit of despair. It wasn't just the financial pressure. It was the emotional weight of living in a house where everything felt broken. Every room felt like a reminder of their failures, the constant fight between hope and fear, the exhausting cycle of pretending that everything would somehow work out. She had no more energy to give. She was running on empty, and there was no one to turn to. One evening, after Jake had gone to bed, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of bills. She felt completely defeated. How had it come to this? What happened to the life they had built together? What happened to their dreams, their plans? Suddenly, the door opened, and John stepped into the kitchen, his eyes downcast. He had a strange look on his face, one that Sarah couldn't quite place. "I have to tell you something," he said, his voice tight. "What is it?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. John hesitated for a moment before he spoke. "I've been offered a job," he said, the words hanging in the air between them. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "That's great, John. That's exactly what we need." But John shook his head. "It's not that simple. It's not what I expected. It's not even in my field. But, it's all I've got. It's the only option left." Sarah's heart sank. "What do you mean? What kind of job is it?" John's face twisted in frustration. "It's a sales job. Low-level, commission-based. It's a step down, way down from where I was." Sarah sat back in her chair, absorbing his words. She wanted to feel relief, but all she felt was uncertainty. Would this be enough to get them back on track? Would it even work? But she knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning of a new chapter in their lives, and she had no idea where it would take them. The first day of John's new job felt like a crushing weight on Sarah's chest. She had tried to put on a brave face, tried to act like everything was okay, but deep down, she couldn't shake the unease that clung to her like a shadow. John was finally working again, but the job he had taken, sales, commission-based, a far cry from the executive position he had lost, felt like a step backward, not just financially, but emotionally. They had always been a family that valued ambition, success, the drive to achieve more. To watch John, the man she had once admired for his determination, take a job that felt like a last resort, filled her with a strange mixture of sympathy and dread. She was proud of him for getting back out there, for trying to make it work, but the underlying resentment in his eyes when he spoke about the job made her nervous. This wasn't who he was. "I'll be back by 5, John had said that morning, his voice a little too sharp as he kissed her goodbye. "Don't forget to pay the bills." She hadn't replied at first, just watching him as he grabbed his jacket and left, the sound of the door slamming behind him echoing through the empty house. The silence that followed was deafening. The days after John's first day at the sales job passed in a blur. Sarah tried to distract herself with the usual routines, caring for Jake, running errands, cleaning the house, but the tension between her and John was palpable. It hung in the air like a thick fog, and no matter how much they both tried to avoid it, it lingered, suffocating every conversation, every attempt at normalcy. John came home late most nights, exhausted, his face drawn with frustration. He barely spoke to her, his mind consumed with the stresses of the job. The sales calls, the cold leads, the constant rejection, it was like he had taken on a new identity. The man who had once been so confident in his success now seemed like a stranger to her. Each night, she would ask him how it went, and each night, he would respond the same way. Same as yesterday. No sales. The disheartened tone in his voice grew harder to bear. But there was no way to fix it. No way to make it better. She had told him time and time again that it would take time to adjust, that the first few weeks, even months, might be difficult. But nothing could prepare them for this. The weight of the disappointment was crushing both of them, and they were suffocating under its pressure. One night, 2 weeks into John's new job, the tension finally broke. It was a Wednesday, and Sarah had just finished putting Jake to bed. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt unnerving. She had been sitting in the living room, flipping through a magazine but not really reading. Her thoughts were on John, on how much he had changed, how distant he had become. He had been gone all day, and when he came home that evening, he looked even more defeated than usual. He walked into the living room, his shoulders slumped. His tie was loose, his jacket unbuttoned. His shoes clacked heavily against the wooden floor as he made his way to the kitchen without saying a word. "John?" Sarah called, her voice tentative. "Are you okay?" John didn't respond right away. He opened the fridge and grabbed a beer, popping it open with a sharp hiss. The sound filled the silence, making Sarah's stomach tighten. She didn't want to argue. She didn't want to fight. But the silence between them was unbearable. He walked back into the living room, flopping down onto the couch beside her, not meeting her eyes. He took a long drink from the beer before setting it down on the table. "I hate this," he muttered, his voice thick with frustration. "I hate this job. I hate everything about it." Sarah swallowed, her heart aching. "John, it's just temporary. You knew this wouldn't be easy. But you're doing the right thing. You're trying." But John shook his head, cutting her off. "You don't get it, Sarah. This isn't who I am. I was a vice president. I had power, respect, a future. Now I'm cold calling strangers, begging them to buy crap they don't want. I'm not cut out for this. I don't belong here." Sarah felt her throat tighten. She wanted to reach out to him, to comfort him, but there was a part of her that didn't know how. She had spent so long trying to hold everything together that she had no energy left to help him find his way. "I know it's hard," she said softly. "But we'll make it through. You just need time." "Time?" His voice cracked, the frustration spilling over. "Time for what? For things to get worse? I don't want to wait for that. I need something more." The words stung like a slap, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "What are you saying, John?" Her voice wavered, betraying her growing unease. "What more do you want?" John's eyes flashed with anger, the weight of his frustration making him lash out. I want my old life back. I want to be someone again. I want to stop feeling like a failure. I want to stop feeling like you're looking at me with pity." The accusation hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't been looking at him with pity. She had been trying to support him, to hold their family together through this time of uncertainty. But now, hearing him speak like this, it felt as though every ounce of strength she had poured into their relationship was being ripped away. "I'm not pitying you, John," Sarah said, her voice quiet but firm. "I'm scared too. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm not going to give up on us. But you can't push me away. You can't keep shutting me out." John stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "You don't understand. You don't know what it's like to lose everything you've worked for. You don't know what it feels like to have your world crash down around you." Sarah stood up as well, her heart racing. "I know what it feels like to struggle, John. I know what it feels like to feel lost. I'm here with you. I'm not going anywhere." But John was shaking his head, his voice rising. "I don't know if I can do this anymore, Sarah. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not. I'm falling apart." The words were like a dagger to her heart, and she didn't know how to respond. She felt helpless, like there was nothing she could do to fix it. All she wanted was for things to go back to the way they were, to feel safe, to feel like a family again. But the man in front of her wasn't the man she had married. He wasn't the man she had built a life with. "I can't keep living like this," John said finally, his voice trembling. "I can't keep pretending everything's fine when I'm drowning. I need something more. I need to find my way back to who I was." And with that, he turned and walked out the door, leaving Sarah standing in the middle of the room, her heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. The night stretched on like a black void. Sarah sat on the couch, feeling the emptiness of the house settle around her. Jake was asleep upstairs, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to close her eyes, to hope that when she opened them again, everything would be okay. But deep down, she knew that hope wasn't enough. There was no quick fix. There was no way to magically make everything better. They were at a crossroads, and the choices they made in the coming weeks would shape their future in ways they couldn't predict. John had walked out, but Sarah couldn't walk away. Not yet. Not when everything was hanging by a thread. Sarah sat in the dim light of the living room, her hands folded tightly in her lap, staring at the empty space where John had been just hours earlier. He had walked out without a word, leaving her to grapple with his anger and frustration, the sharpness of his words echoing in her mind. She wasn't sure when he would come back, or if he would come back at all. But the silence left in his absence was louder than any argument they had ever had. Her chest tightened as she replayed the evening in her mind. She could still feel the sting of his accusation, that she had been pitying him. Had she? Had she really made him feel like a failure? She never intended for that to happen. She had tried to support him, to show him that they were in this together. But now, with him gone, she felt more isolated than ever before. The weight of their broken communication, the frustration that neither of them could seem to express properly, was overwhelming. It was as if they were speaking two different languages, one of anger and pride, the other of fear and desperation, and neither could understand the other. The clock ticked loudly, marking the passage of time in a way that felt excruciating. John hadn't been gone long, but it felt like days. She wanted to call him, to beg him to come back, but something stopped her. Wasn't it his turn to make the effort? To apologize for the words he had thrown at her? The sound of the door creaking open interrupted her thoughts. She glanced up, heart racing. It was John. He stepped into the living room, his eyes dark, his face weary. His jacket was still unbuttoned, and his tie hung loosely around his neck. He had been gone for several hours, and Sarah couldn't tell if he had been working or just wandering aimlessly. The look on his face made it clear that he wasn't here to apologize. His shoulders slumped in defeat, his eyes avoiding hers. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come at first. Instead, he stood there, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond her, almost as if he was trying to gather the strength to speak. Sarah waited. She knew he had something to say, but she wasn't sure what it was. Whatever it was, it felt heavy, and it wasn't going to be easy to hear. John started, his voice raw. I don't know what's happening to me, Sarah. His words were soft, almost as if he was speaking to himself, but Sarah heard them clearly. She held her breath, her fingers tightening around the fabric of her jeans. I don't know who I am anymore, John continued, his voice faltering. I used to be so sure of everything. I had a plan. I had power. I had control. And now it's all gone. I feel like I'm losing myself. Sarah's heart twisted. She knew this wasn't just about the job. It wasn't just about the lost career. It was about everything, about the way he had defined himself by his work, about how much that sense of identity had come crashing down. I know you're frustrated, she said gently, trying to keep her voice steady. But you don't have to lose yourself. We're still here. I'm still here. John shook his head, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and self-loathing. You don't get it, Sarah. I don't know if I can keep pretending to be the man you want me to be. I don't know if I can keep pretending to be okay when I'm falling apart. There it was again, the feeling that he wasn't talking to her but to some version of himself that didn't exist anymore. The man who had been confident, assertive, in control. The man he had once been seemed like a ghost, haunting both of them, unable to move forward, unable to reconcile with the person he had become. I don't want you to pretend, John, Sarah whispered, her eyes welling with tears. I just want you. I just want us to get through this together. John finally looked at her, his eyes softening, but the vulnerability in them only made the distance between them more painful. He walked over to the couch and sat beside her, his hands running through his hair in frustration. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix me. Sarah reached for his hand, her fingers brushing against his. She wanted to hold him, to tell him that it would be okay, that they would figure it out, but the words felt hollow. How could she promise him something she didn't even believe herself? I think, John paused, his voice trembling. I think I need help. Not just with the job, but with everything. I've been so focused on trying to keep everything together that I've lost myself. And I can't do this alone anymore. For the first time in weeks, Sarah saw a glimmer of the man she had once known, a man who was willing to admit his flaws, to acknowledge that he couldn't fix everything on his own. It was a small step, but it was a step forward. I'll be here, John, she said, her voice steady. I'll help you. We'll figure this out. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just need to take it one day at a time. John let out a shaky breath and nodded, the weight of his own guilt and fear lifting just a little. It wasn't a solution, but it was a beginning. The next few days passed in a blur of awkward silences and careful conversations. John seemed more distant at times, but there was a small shift in his demeanor. He was trying, in his own way, to rebuild the pieces of himself he had lost. He had taken a step back from the frustration that had consumed him and was attempting to reconnect with his family, with Sarah, in ways he hadn't before. It wasn't easy. The strain of everything that had happened still hung over them, thick and suffocating, but Sarah could see the effort he was making. He was no longer running away from the problems he couldn't solve, but he was learning how to face them, slowly but surely. One evening, after Jake had gone to bed, John sat at the kitchen table, scribbling something on a piece of paper. Sarah had been in the other room, tidying up, but when she came into the kitchen, she stopped in her tracks. He was making a list, of things to do, of places to look for jobs, of steps to take. For the first time in weeks, she saw a spark of the old John, the one who believed that hard work and determination could fix anything. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice a mixture of surprise and cautious hope. John looked up, his eyes tired but resolute. "I'm making a plan," he said simply. "I know it's not going to happen overnight, but I have to do something. I can't just sit around waiting for things to get better." Sarah's heart fluttered with a mixture of relief and fear. She was happy to see him taking action, but she couldn't shake the worry that this wouldn't be enough. They had been down this road before, and each time, the hope had been fleeting. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly, walking over to him. "Just don't lose yourself again in all of this, okay? Don't forget that we're in this together." John nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I won't," he said quietly. "I promise." But as the days turned into weeks, the reality of their situation began to settle in. John's job search had not yielded much success. He had made some calls, sent out more resumes, but the competition was fierce. The market was flooded with people who were more qualified, more experienced. It was hard not to feel like they were running in circles, fighting for a spot that no one was willing to give. Sarah, too, felt the weight of the uncertainty. She had picked up more work, freelance writing, tutoring, but it was never enough. Every month, the bills piled up. They had cut back on everything they could, but it still didn't seem to make a difference. They were living paycheck to paycheck, one missed payment away from falling deeper into debt. She wanted to believe that everything would turn around, that the struggles they were facing would somehow be worth it in the end. But every day that passed without any progress made her feel more and more like they were trapped in a never-ending cycle of disappointment and fear. And then, just when they thought things couldn't get worse, the phone call came. It was a Wednesday morning when Sarah picked up the phone and heard the voice on the other end. Her stomach sank as soon as she recognized it. "Sarah, we need to talk." It was John's old boss. And the words that followed were like a punch to the gut. The phone call echoed in Sarah's ears long after she had hung up. John's old boss, Greg Weston, a man she hadn't heard from in weeks, had called out of the blue with a cryptic tone that sent a chill down her spine. "We need to talk," he'd said. There was no hello, no preamble, just the blunt necessity of getting down to business. It wasn't like Greg to just reach out casually. If it was something minor, he would have sent an email or a message. But this call felt different, urgent, almost as though it was the beginning of something that Sarah couldn't yet see but could already feel deep in her bones. John had been sitting at the kitchen table when Sarah received the call, flipping through a pile of job listings in his usual futile search for something that would make the financial weight of their lives feel lighter. His brow was furrowed, and the tension in his body was palpable. His posture had softened in the past few days. He was trying, really trying, to fight through his anger and guilt, but there was still an undeniable wall between him and the man he used to be. The job search, combined with the self-doubt that had been eating him alive, made every day feel like he was walking on a tightrope. The minute Sarah hung up the phone, he looked up, his eyes scanning her face for any sign of good news or bad. He knew she wouldn't have answered the phone unless it was important. Greg had been the last person they both wanted to hear from. What did he want? John's voice was thick with exhaustion, tinged with anxiety. Sarah hesitated. She wasn't sure how to tell him this news. The past few days had been the calmest they'd had in weeks, with John finally taking small steps forward, trying to reconcile with his current reality. But now, everything was about to change again. "Greg called," she finally said, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of concern. John stiffened at the mention of his former boss's name. "Greg? What did he say?" "That we need to talk." Sarah felt her heart race as she spoke. He didn't say much more than that, but it didn't sound like anything good. John's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "I haven't heard from him in over a month. After everything that happened, why would he be calling now?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her gaze focused on the phone in her hand. The sound of the dial tone still rang faintly in her mind, as though Greg's voice was lingering in the air even though the call had ended. But whatever it is, I don't think it's good. John stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His movements were stiff, his mind spinning with all the possibilities, none of them good. The last time Greg had contacted him had been when he had been let go from his position as vice president. The phone call had been short and to the point. "Sorry, John, but we have to let you go. We can't afford to keep you on anymore." The words had been delivered with the kind of corporate detachment that had stung more than anything else. But now, to hear from Greg again felt like a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. He felt a pang of bitterness, a resentment that he couldn't quite shake. Greg had been the one who had fired him, the one who had made him feel like he was disposable. Now, after all this time, Greg was calling as if nothing had happened. As if they were still friends. "Should I call him back?" Sarah asked, her voice tentative. John's jaw clenched as he turned toward the window, staring out at the world beyond. "I don't know what to do, Sarah. I don't know what he wants, but I don't think I'm ready to deal with him yet. Not after everything. Not after the way he just tossed me aside." Sarah walked over to him, standing close but giving him space. She could feel the rawness of his emotions, the anger that was still simmering just below the surface. "You don't have to do anything right now. Maybe we should wait and think about it. You don't owe him anything." But John wasn't so sure. Part of him wanted to ignore Greg completely, to never speak to the man again. But another part of him, the part that still held on to the remnants of his former life, was curious. Maybe Greg had some sort of opportunity for him. Maybe, just maybe, this was a chance to redeem himself. "I just don't know," John muttered, turning back toward the table. "What if this is the break I've been waiting for? What if Greg has a way to get me back in? I don't think I can keep doing this, scraping by, looking for a job that no one wants to give me." Sarah knew that tone. It was the one John used when he was on the verge of making a decision that could change everything, for better or worse. It was the same tone he had used when he had first taken the job offer at the sales company, the same tone he had used when he had made the leap to corporate life all those years ago. But Sarah didn't want him to make decisions out of desperation. She didn't want him to return to a world that had let him down before, a world that had crushed his confidence and his sense of worth. "John, I know you're frustrated. I know you're scared. But I need you to think this through. Do you really want to go back to that life? Do you really want to give up everything we've worked for just for another shot at that kind of success?" John was quiet for a long time. He stared at the table, lost in thought, his mind grappling with the ghosts of the past and the uncertain future. He knew Sarah was right. He knew he couldn't return to that life of high pressure and even higher stakes. But the temptation was there, like a lure, pulling him back into a world he thought he had left behind. "I don't know if I can do this, Sarah," John said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's okay. I don't know if I can keep failing. I don't know if I can keep being the man I'm supposed to be for you." Sarah's heart broke at his words. She had seen him struggle for so long, seen him fight to keep his head above water. But this wasn't the man she had fallen in love with. The man she had married had been confident, driven, ambitious, not this version of John who felt lost and broken. "You don't have to pretend," Sarah said softly, her voice full of warmth and love. "You just have to be honest with yourself. And with me." John looked up at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration, fear, and longing. "I want to be that man again, Sarah. I want to be someone who can provide for you and Jake. I don't want to let you down." Sarah reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You're not letting us down. We're in this together, remember? We'll find our way through this. We don't need to go back to the life we had. We just need to move forward. You just need to trust yourself, and trust me." John squeezed her hand, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope, something small but real. Maybe they didn't need to go back to the old life. Maybe they could build something new, something that didn't rely on the success they once had. Maybe, just maybe, there was another way to move forward. That night, after dinner, John sat down at the kitchen table and finally dialed Greg's number. His hands were shaking, his mind racing with the possibilities, none of them good, none of them offering any kind of comfort. The phone rang 3 times before Greg's voice came on the other end. "John. It's been a while." "Yeah," John replied, his voice tight. "What's going on? Why are you calling?" Greg hesitated before responding. "I know things didn't end well between us, but I need to talk to you about something important." John sat in the dimly lit kitchen, the phone still pressed to his ear, as the words from Greg's voice echoed in his mind. The sound of his old boss's voice, calm, almost distant, was a sharp contrast to the firestorm of emotions churning inside John. His fingers gripped the edge of the table, nails digging into the wood as he waited for Greg to continue. "John," Greg's voice came again, this time more measured, as if he was treading carefully, "I know things between us were difficult. And I know you're probably wondering why I'm calling after all this time. But I need to talk to you about something important." John's stomach churned. He wanted to hang up, to tell Greg that he had no interest in anything the man had to say, but the words felt stuck in his throat. This wasn't just about Greg, it was about everything. It was about the choices John had made, the failures that seemed to stack up one after another, and the man he had become. It was about whether he could ever find his way back. "Greg," John said, his voice strained, "I'm listening." "What is it?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, John wondered if Greg had changed his mind, if this call was some kind of cruel joke. But then Greg's voice came again, low and steady. "I want you to come back, John," Greg said, the words hanging heavily in the air. "We've been looking for someone with your experience. I know it's been rough for you lately, but we need someone like you to take the lead on a new project. This is a big opportunity, and I think you're the right man for the job." John's heart skipped a beat. The word struck him with the force of a sledgehammer. After everything, the betrayal, the firing, the months of struggling to get back on his feet, Greg was offering him a chance to return. The very idea felt surreal, as though the universe had somehow decided to offer him a lifeline just when he had given up on ever reaching it. He felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him. On one hand, it was the answer to all his problems. The security of a stable job, the chance to rebuild his life, to reclaim some semblance of the man he used to be. On the other hand, it was the return to a world he had left behind, the high-pressure, cutthroat corporate environment that had pushed him to the brink in the first place. It was a world where he had lost himself, where he had sacrificed his own happiness for the sake of success. Was he ready to dive back into that world? Was he even the same person who had walked away? "I don't know," John finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do it, Greg. I don't know if I can go back to that life." Greg's tone softened. "I understand, John. But this isn't just about the job. It's about redemption. It's about getting your life back on track. You've been through a lot, but I know you've got it in you. This could be your second chance." John sat there, the weight of Greg's words settling on him like a thick blanket. It wasn't just about the job, it was about his identity, his self-worth, his future. He had spent so long in the shadows of his own doubt, too afraid to step back into the light, too afraid of failing again. But now, the opportunity was in front of him, waiting. "What do I need to do?" John asked, his voice resolute, the decision beginning to take shape in his mind. "What's the next step?" Greg's response was swift, almost relieved. "I'll send over the details of the project, and we'll set up a meeting for next week. I know it's a big decision, John. Take your time, but I want you to know that the door's open. We want you back." As the conversation ended and the phone call clicked off, John sat there for a moment, staring at the now silent phone. His mind was racing. He had been given a choice, a chance to go back, to rebuild, to prove to himself and to others that he was capable of more than his failures. But was it the right choice? Could he return to the world that had almost destroyed him, or had he learned enough from his past to make a different path forward? Sarah had been sitting nearby, watching him with a quiet intensity. She had been waiting for him to make the call, and now that it was over, she could see the shift in his eyes. The decision was weighing on him, and she knew it wasn't just about the job. It was about his own identity, who he was now and who he wanted to become. John looked at her, his expression unreadable. "He wants me back, Sarah. He wants me to come back to the company. There's a project, and he thinks I'm the right person for the job." Sarah's heart skipped. She had known this was a possibility, but hearing the words out loud made it all the more real. She stood up and walked over to him, sitting down beside him at the table. "What do you want, John? What do you think is the right thing to do?" He stared at the table, his fingers tracing the edge of the wood. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me wants to go back. Part of me thinks this is my chance to fix everything, to prove that I'm not a failure, that I can still make something of myself. But then there's another part of me that's scared. Scared that I'll lose myself again, that I'll end up right back where I started, burned out, unhappy, stuck in a life I hate." Sarah reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "I know you've been through a lot, John. And I know that nothing I say can make this decision easier. But I want you to know that whatever you decide, will be okay. I'm with you, no matter what. We're in this together." John looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude and something else, a flicker of hope, the first real spark he had felt in months. "I don't know if I can go back, Sarah. But I don't want to let you down. I don't want to fail you." "You're not failing me, John," Sarah said softly. "You're just trying to figure out what's best for you. And that's okay. You don't have to have all the answers right now." John exhaled slowly, his mind still a whirlpool of confusion. "I don't want to make a decision out of fear or desperation. I want to make the right choice. For me. For us." Sarah nodded. "And that's why you'll make the right choice, John. You're thinking about it. You're being honest with yourself. And that's all we can really do, take it one step at a time, and trust that we're doing the best we can with the choices we have." The next few days passed in a blur of restless nights and anxious mornings. John couldn't stop thinking about the offer. He had always prided himself on being decisive, on making things happen, but this time, it felt different. This time, every choice carried the weight of everything that had happened in the past year, the job loss, the stress, the overwhelming sense of failure. He knew that returning to the corporate world would mean confronting all of those demons once again. But he also knew that he couldn't stay stuck in his current life forever. On the 5th day after the call, John made his decision. He dialed Greg's number, his hand trembling slightly as the phone rang. When Greg picked up, his voice was as smooth and reassuring as always. "John, I'm glad you called." John took a deep breath before speaking, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I'm in, Greg. I'll take the job." The following weeks were a whirlwind. John returned to his old life, but this time, it was different. He was different. He had learned the hard way that success without balance, without emotional health, was hollow. This time, he would do things differently, taking care of himself, taking care of Sarah, and not losing sight of the things that truly mattered. But the road ahead was still uncertain. There would always be challenges, always be setbacks. But John had learned to face them with a new kind of strength, one that came from within, from the lessons of his struggles, from the support of his family. And in the end, it wasn't the job or the money that defined him. It was the journey. The way he had learned to rebuild, to forgive, to love.